Welcoming to the stage. From left to right, right to left, whatever you want. Berko Beuten, as you can read, Media 2B. Next to him is Henk Doornbos, Contracts 11. Oh, Dr. Henk Doornbos, Contracts 11. The title is really important.
Wow.
Next to him, Oscar Villaplana, all the way from Switzerland.
All the way.
Loving the Swiss fondue, I heard. And next to him, Peter Hinchens, writer, programmer, and thinking, Imatics.
Thinking from Brussels.
Imatics. I heard you say Imatics. I would say Imatics, but Imatics better. Whatever works. Perfect. And I'm Sietse, Mr. Fix-It at Media 2B, Hugo, Pelogic, well, whatever works. Welcoming to the stage. This is the panel discussion for this edition of PyGrun, talking about re-decentralizing the internet.
Yeah.
And he's going to kick off.
Yes, thank you. This is actually a follow-up to last. I'll give a short presentation just to get everything kick-started here about this subject and what we're going to talk about. Last year we had a kick-off, actually also a panel discussion here. Ivan Vlax was on there, Armin Ronacher was on there, etc. It was actually a small introduction. Okay, what we're seeing right now is that the centralization, the internet as it is at the moment is very centralized. Well, it's becoming more and more centralized, it looks like it. And that leads to some kinds of problems. So the question is, what are the problems in it, and is there a way to address that? So last year's panel discussion is very much, okay, what are there really problems, and what are these problems, and is it viable that we could possibly solve them, etc. So actually, this year we're going to talk about, okay, what are the other alternatives to centralized systems, for instance, decentralized systems, that we can use instead of decentralized systems, that we can avoid the problems and the pitfalls of the past, and then continue, hopefully, in a better and brighter future. To eat our own dog food in the past year, I've started my own company in this very area, together with Henk, coincidentally, and with Herman here as well, whose talk you might have seen. An interesting thing is that we firmly believe in the fact there's alternatives for centralized systems that are way more powerful than centralized systems, actually. They work differently, sometimes there's a trade-off, etc., but there's interesting stuff in there. And so what I'm going to do is just give a quick look back at last year's panel discussion, the topic in it, and now I want to kick off this discussion. I think the audience is just as much as a participant in this discussion as the panel here is. And this panel has some time, so there's 2 talks during this panel, so there might be people coming in and out actually halfway through, but don't get distracted by that. I'll give a quick introduction. If there's anything, just raise your hand, start shouting, and if you agree or don't agree, or have something that you met or have seen, then please let us know, because it's all about sharing knowledge and sharing ideas and the things that we've done in the past. So, as said, over the last year, we've started a company in this very area. We're building software. We're doing it in a manner as discussed with Herman and Henk recently. We're going from a model-driven approach indeed to systems that are generated and that can be run autonomously based in contracts. That's the area that we're focusing on right now, but the bigger goal that we have is how to build this decentralized internet. And I'm going to talk a bit, we'll be discussing that during the talk as well, but that'll be later on during the question section. So last year, we talked about the dangers of centralization, and we had some options and solutions. So the takeaway quote from last year would say that centralized systems lead to distributed problems. We've attached, I've gave many examples last year of what the problem is with centralized systems, and I'm going to run through a few of them. Centralization problems occur in very different domains. If you look, for instance, at the data, and one of the examples that I had last year is that I've been using, well, in the past I used ICQ, and then I used IRC, and then I used Google Wave, and then I used Facebook, and then I used I don't know what. And all the data, everything I ever wrote in there is basically kind of lost. Not I mean, it went into corporate servers, big centralized systems indeed, and it basically disappeared under my fingers, and there's no way I can get it back basically. And actually Google is the only company that actually gives me some access to that stuff, but basically most of that stuff is gone. What these companies do, and although initially it seems like they're really doing the best for you, in the end, when the business model for them is gone in your data, then they just shut down the servers and you're back to square one, and data is still locked up in their central server. There's no way that you personally own that data. There's no way to get it back. And to be honest, every comment that I give on whatever blog post or whatever forum discussion that I'm in, or any Stack Overflow discussion that I'm in, it's my opinion, it's my utterance, it's my data actually that I'm uttering there. There's no, why should these companies own my data over there? The only reason that works is because they're real big centralized systems. Everybody goes to this central place and they share stuff. The fact is this central place contains their data. They keep the data and they use it actually, and they actually use it for marketing purposes in the end. So your eyeballs are really all what matters to them, which means that they can sell their ads, and that's how you pay for their systems in the end. I've come to learn the hard way that after all these years, I mean, I've been using the internet for many, I mean, actually almost from day one, I would say. I've learned the hard way that that's a system that is not really viable. It gives me a lot of creep because I don't know where my data is, and I hated its loss actually. I want to have control over my own data, and I want to use systems that I'm in control of what of my personal products. It's not the case. So in data, it's an obvious case that it happens, but it also happens in source code. What we've seen over the past years, what you see is very big monolithic systems that have been built indeed. We've been building actually big monolithic systems. I mean, I'm no saint in that respect as well, because technologies were not really there at the moment when we built these systems to build alternatives that are not as big and monolithic, but are distributed and consist of very small parts and could work together. So instead of decentralized systems, you had big centralized systems, and the disadvantages of these centralized systems that are brittle, they're hard to maintain, they're complex. I think most of the audience, people who has ever worked with a big system, whether it's in a hospital or whether it's in a commercial company, there are limits to what humans can do with big central monolithic systems. Of course, if you take a big distributed system, it has its problems as well. One of the disadvantages of distributed systems is that if you architecture it well, it consists of many loosely coupled components that you can maintain easier and better. So that's some ideas. We have some ideas how you build these systems, how you could build them, the tooling around that, and the ideas behind that. My own background is in distributed systems as well, and I have been thinking about this for a very long time. Henk and I have been discussing this stuff for a very long time. How would you build that? What are the tools and technologies that are available for this, etc. I'm not going to dive into these technologies now, but they'll probably pop up during the panel discussion. Later on this today, I'll give a talk about how we're, within Contracts 11, how we're implementing systems as more like a Microsoft architecture, which is very closely related to the idea of systems consisting of small components that work together instead of big monolithic one-size-fits-all systems. So in code and applications, you see the same thing happening. That centralized. There was really a trend towards centralized systems in the past. Development as well. Development processes. What we've seen. I mean, and a very interesting example, I think, is GitHub. I mean, almost everybody assumes that everybody uses GitHub now. If you develop an open source software, everybody assumes you have a GitHub account. I find that kind of strange. Basically, when we started our company, we said one thing I don't want to do is depend on GitHub, because GitHub is an excellent example of a very centralized system. So they take something that's by nature is built for decentralized workflows, Git itself, and then they centralize it to build some tooling around it, and then you lock you into this environment called GitHub. Right? And that's a trend we've been seeing all over again. Well, the disadvantage, of course, is that my comments are in over there, all discussions are over there. Code reviews are over in GitHub, etc. And they do add value, but you're paying a price over there. And the price is going to be that you'll have to pay for GitHub within 10 years. And the price will be that they'll be bankrupt in 15 years, and then what? Where's your code, where's your commands, where's your workflow? And many businesses nowadays base their business on GitHub, and I question how smart it is. So even in software development, you see really centralized force. And of course, it's obvious in the beginning when there are no real alternatives that it's easy to get started. When you just get a GitHub account and off you go, you just share stuff, you have pull requests, and you share your libraries, etc. And you have to do a bit more work if you don't want to use all that stuff, but you, for instance, want to use Git bare bones. So how do you do code reviews? How do you make sure that everybody's looking at the same repositories? So it might take a little more effort to do just that. So initially, centralized version, the centralized way was easier and easier to get started with. But it has a price in it that's only become obvious in the long run. Things are getting more, I think we're now at a certain stage in a point in time where things can be decentralized again. That's why the title of this talk. There are alternatives to all these centralized systems, and there's a lot of buzz going on, and there's a lot of software being developed as an alternative to these big centralized systems. Whether it's a decentralized YouTube, or it's a decentralized Reddit, or whether it's a decentralized version control community, or everything is there's also an alternative being built, right? It's really decentralized, where there's no central point of control, but that power can be centralized and be misused for non-obvious reasons. But this discussion goes even further than the software development. It also goes to the level of organizational structures. For instance, companies that really in the past, and over the past decades, we saw companies that really grow humongous in hundreds of thousands of employees. And the question is, why are these companies, is that a normal business model that companies become so big? Or is it really because there is no technical alternative to organize that kind of stuff? Or is it some mixture maybe of technical limitations, maybe physical limitations, or whatever it is? But what I do know is that what you see is that somehow there's slowly these bigger companies crippling down, and there are more network of smaller companies taking over the roles of the bigger companies of the past. The huge monolithic, General Electric kind of companies that are so big and so centralized that they're impossible to maintain, basically. Alternatives are sprouting that are smaller. There are networks of companies. Sometimes there are very few people that are easier to maintain and are more autonomous to run. So organizations also, there's also there's something happening in there. The organizations themselves are changing. The way the organizations are working is changing. And the same is goes for nations. I think a very nice example what we've seen recently is that in Estland, Estland? Is this how it say it, right? Estonia, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
In Estonia, what you get, everybody can become an Estonian. All you have to do, because they digitized their complete government infrastructure. So anybody who thinks, hey, I'm more like an Estonian than I'm Dutch, can become Estonian as well. You just have to sign up. That raises the question what a nation actually is. When are you part of a nation, and when are you part of, like, what is a nation? Is it a group of people that belong together, or do they share a law, or do they share like currency, or do they share like the same set of beliefs of a moral or ethics, that kind of stuff? I don't know. Estonia took it to the next level. Said, well, basically, if you want to be Estonian, just sign up here. You get an Estonian passport, and you're wherever you live in the world, we don't care. You can be an Estonian. So you share the same, for instance, law or the same set of rules that we believe in, which is part of being Estonian, and then you're Estonian. So what is it being a nation? What is a nation? What is law, and what are the limits of these things, and how are there alternatives to these things? An important development recently is, of course, everybody has read about the blockchain revolution and building systems that that builds trust into untrusted environments, and it's a very powerful concept, and this idea can be taken very far. The consequence that such a blockchain technology could have, for instance, for law, or for negotiations, or for trade, or whatever it is, I think are hard to overstate. There's troubles with it, there's problems with it, etc. But somehow, genie is out of the bottle, and now the question is, what can you do with it? I mean, what are these limitations? How do you build them? And what should you try? What shouldn't we try? I mean, should we try to build new nations, or should we try to build new nations? Should we reinvent law? Law is like a set of contracts, and since contracts, as we've shown, can be stored in the blockchain, then why should it be a nation that has these contracts? Why is it not like a group of people that say, okay, we believe in this set of contracts, so we adhere to that, and if we don't play by these contract rules, we get punished. If that's the rule, then you can maybe build some new sort of nation, basically. It's all possible. But as Richard Feynman says, there's always plenty of room at the bottom. So if you look back from nations to organizations to workflows to humans, then go down to the objects, basically, like a chair or a microphone or a laptop, whatever. You look at the Internet of Things, and there's an interesting discussion going on. In this, if you connect all these objects around you and then you let them all work together, what are these centralization forces that we've seen in the past from I don't know, Facebook, Google, all these large organizations, if this force towards centralization also going to happen in Internet of Things, which means that the physical surrounding that you have will be centralized and will be prone to misuse, basically. You'll walk into the same pitfalls as we've done with the big social media and the ones that basically nowadays own your data. The question is, if you have an Internet of Things, everything is connected, do you want like these big companies to own that stuff, control that stuff, that you're out of control in that situation? Yes?
Yeah, you said you can move it through. I was wondering whether that would actually be true for the Internet of Things. So you want to give me your mind?
Yeah.
So
I think there are more voices saying that we shouldn't centralize everything with the Internet of Things. So I spoke with people from Philips who are making now robots do everything, and they cannot control the robots centrally because the data stream is just too large. So they want all the robots to be autonomous, talking with the other robots in the assembly line. Yeah. And I talked to people from the smart meter project. They say they want basically, the electricity companies want to have every refrigerator to be turned off and on separate times. But they realize they cannot do that centrally because there's just not enough processing power and such. So they also realize they will do that decentralized, at least within say, your neighborhood block or something. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether we will actually make the same mistakes, because many people who are actually not so much worried about the worries you have still want to decentralize things.
Yes, excellent point. And I'll be touching upon that indeed, because some things cannot be centralized. I mean, it's a very good point that you're making. A very recent study actually by IBM also showed that if you want to, the Internet of Things is going to exist out of, they said 50 billion, at least by 2010, I don't know, 20 or 30 something.
I think that's just a matter of willpower. If you look at Apple, the watch, that's a thing. It's completely centralized. Yeah. That's a matter of corporate vision, and in fact, you as a client will pay for the bandwidth to make it happen.
Yeah. So. Yes, because there's two roads. On the one hand, there's like IBM and research. You get 50 billion devices. There's no way anybody can ever manage that. There's no way you control that. And another study recently showed that if you go to, they send a set of hackers, a couple of hackers, they send it to the hospital, say, just have a look around to see what you can break into. They basically broke into every device that was in the hospital, from heart monitors to insulin pumps, and they can just kill everybody in the hospital if they wanted to. They could just control any device in that hospital. And the main reason was because none of these devices in the hospital was updated with the latest patches and firmwares, and nobody was responsible for this. So even nowadays, maintaining all these connected devices, if you connect these devices to the internet, there's nobody is going to be responsible for maintaining them. So centrally maintaining this large network of entities is basically impossible. And as you say, Philips would run into the same problem. It's impossible to do so. So decentralization will, in that case, be the only viable road ahead. But on that, as Peter says very rightfully, because last year when we had the panel discussion, it was right after we had the iBeacon introduction by Apple. Now the iBeacon is an excellent example. That's the first inroad that a company, very, very powerful, huge, like watches of 200 billion or something, I believe, into your physical surrounding. And there's no way you can interact with the iBeacon without your iTunes account, without your credit card connected. Basically, it's Apple taking over your physical environment. And that's what I said last year. For me, that's where I draw the line. Because that's exactly what I don't want. The fact that they own my mail and they can scan my mail and they're using my eyeballs to sell ads, okay, I'm not really fine with it, but I can live with it. But the moment that Apple just tries to control my physical surrounding, that's what I said. Okay, that's where I draw the line personally. That's definitely not what I want. Certainly not if we know that there are alternatives available that we can build just as well. The question is, if we're all lazy and do nothing about it, Apple will for sure infiltrate your physical environment. Make sure that they control your thermostat, that they control all your iBeacons, they control all your iPads, laptops, and whatever is in your home, and they'll be in control. And the only way for you to get to get through a digital line to your own physical environment will be through Apple systems. I think that danger is a lot bigger than most people currently realize. And I think that's a real danger, but trying to be optimistic, there are alternatives, of course. And as I said, a number of technologies are being developed right now that enable decentralized systems in which you aren't connected to, you aren't dependable on one company, and the whole force there's a force of decentralization instead of centralization. I think that's what the interesting discussion is. What are these technologies? How should we use them? What are the problems that we can address with these things? And what are the limitations as well? Because it's not like Haarlemmer olie that can fix anything. And so we have to be critical about it, but also have to be creative about it. And to be honest, it takes a lot of technology and a technological understanding what these alternatives are. But running into the same pitfalls as we did in the past, like throwing all your data at Facebook or throwing all your data at Google and then being lost, is quite bad if you look at it at a physical situation. And that's the last thing I want to... Yes?
Isn't that dangerous in a distributed system as well?
Yeah.
Isn't it dangerous in a distributed system as well when you, for example, you were talking about messaging clients? Yeah. If you would push all your messages through a distributed system, then someone could potentially harvest all that data, and at some point we will have quantum computers or something that could break the encryption that is used. So basically all your data for the past 10 years or something would be free for all.
Yeah, any system that, I mean, of course, any system can be broken into, but the fact is, the question is, are you in control of your own data? Are you the owner of your own data? Of course, if somebody grabs your key and steals your data, yeah, sure, you're done. I mean, if somebody breaks into your house and steals your computer, and you decide that you keep your data on your computer at home, then they steal it. Yes.
But then there's an obvious crime. I mean, if you just publish all your data encrypted to the cloud, if you to the blockchain or whatever, something like that, or a torrent mechanism or something.
Let me give you an example of a decentralized system where this is just not a risk. Okay, you take photographs on your mobile phone without uploading them, and you share them with other people, right? You show them. You maybe email them. That's decentralized.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to monitor this and to capture this and to replay this and to attack it in the future. Decentralization also means very local discussions, right? Which are very difficult to spy on.
Yeah.
You can, of course, come into a room and come into a Wi-Fi hotspot and come into a place and spy on people. It's very expensive. And the thing about centralization is it's very cheap to spy on people, right? It doesn't, spying is never excluded. It's just a question of cost.
Yes.
Right. So decentralization makes it very, very expensive to collect data on people.
Yeah, it's a matter of cost. Security is I'll have a slide on that. It's a trade between security and there's a price to decentralization, but there's also a price to security, and there's a trade-off in there. And the more decentralized something is, the harder it will be to attack. But there are, of course, it's a trade-off, and you have to pick your own. But for me, what is important is that you at least have the choice to do so, and you have the choice to say, okay, how decentralized you want to be with your data, and where you want to store it, how you want to encrypt it, and who can access it. You could say, for instance, I'm going to store everything in the blockchain, right? And it's only accessible with my private key. It's possible. Maybe you have some other means. You say, I'm going to protect it with my private key, and I don't know, some physical quantities like your eye, or fingerprint, or whatever you want to do. I mean, it's all possible. It's up to you. But the real danger is if you have centralized systems, it's very easy. We've seen it with the NSA, and that's even at the tip of the iceberg what we've heard, what can be done currently to spy on these systems. We're not even close to understanding what they can do with these centralized systems. Yeah. It's very easy if all data goes to a couple of data centers to spy on that stuff. If everything is in GitHub, not many people do it, but you can get so much business information from GitHub, or personal information from GitHub. You can run scans, how many passwords in there, you'll laugh your ass off, basically. Because it's easy to do so, because there's an API, you can scan, how many passwords, you get hundreds of passwords for free, because they're all, everybody just commits that stuff. And there's system information in there, very variable, sensitive information in these centralized systems, and anybody who can use an API, which basically everybody in this building today, can get that information. And the only reason that is problematic is because it's a centralized system that anybody can access very easily. And that's the core to the problem here. And the really problem is if this problem moves over from the virtual to the physical domain, then I think that shit really starts hitting the fan. But then you're in real deep trouble. If you're depending on a big company for your physical surroundings, for your health, or for safety, for security, and physical security and safety is really the one that really counts compared to you use your profile photo of your cat. Then things, the ball changes, and as far as I'm concerned. So that's why we're having these discussions. And okay, what are our alternatives, and how could we use them, and what has been built in the past, etc. As I said, I've been thinking about this for a very long time. I've seen a lot of technologies come and go over the last decades. Some very good ideas that have been forgotten and then are resurfacing again. Some stupid ideas. Some ideas that were too early, and now the time's finally come, etc. So there are alternatives. It's good to be aware of what the alternatives are and how we could build that kind of future. So why address this now? As I said, the problems of centralized systems will have increasingly severe consequences in the physical domain, and how should we address this? Now, of course, a solution that could be possible is to have a web that connects decentralized services, like a smart network. Maybe instead of centralized services, make the network between these simple servers really smart, that they're really good at getting supply and demand together. Like if this is something we want, I'm the one that knows how to connect something that supply something. So then you get a web that consists of decentralized services. That's an option you can build, but that means that the network itself should have some intelligence in it. Then what is an intelligent network? There's a lot of research being going into dynamic routing or intelligent routing, software-defined radio. I don't know, all kinds of research has been going into how you define intelligent networks. But maybe you should look from a different perspective and see a network as if there's like a DNA in a network that forces that is a force against centralization. So a network that tries to decentralize at all times, then the things might, like it's in the DNA of the network, that might be an interesting consequence that the network always stays decentralized. And Bitcoin is a nice example in where it actually works. If you try to centralize Bitcoin, Bitcoin breaks down, because that's not the way it works. I mean, fundamentally, if you centralize Bitcoin, then if one person does the mining, then it's easy to throw over Bitcoin, because that's the miner you throw them over, and it's easy to get more computing power than this one person, so that doesn't work. Decentralizing the problem, the more decentralized it is, the stronger the whole system is. And if you try to decentralize it, it breaks down. It's more like some kind of quantum property of Bitcoin. Try to centralize it, it breaks down. And if this property is also, if this property would also go for the network in itself. So if you try to centralize any power in the network itself stops working. So that nobody, I mean, so it means trying to centralize in the network means that the system stops working, so that the price is too high to do so. So trying to centralize, so it will be impossible to centralize such a system. And that's an interesting idea. That might be an idea to build such a system. That's what we've been thinking about, and that's what I like to discuss, what we like to discuss internally. And the servers can act according to contracts. We've been talking about contracts in a few talks today already. What if these, of course, if one service talks to another service, you have to think about these things have to somehow, if you want to come to a transaction, somehow you must know, okay, one must offer something, the other must demand something, they must come to an agreement, this is what you offer and this is what I try to get. And if you come to a transaction, the transaction should be stored, and then so everyone can verify it, and if somebody doesn't hold himself to the contract, he should be punished or something. And so contracts are it's like a it's like the glue to such a system that must be work. So maybe you need, like in intelligent network, you need contracts in there to make it work. You need a way to connect the demand to supply. So these services must be able to discover themselves. The way I look at it, for instance, if you look at Google, for instance, everybody thinks, oh, Google is a nice search machine, but then you can search in the internet. Well, you can search the internet, but Google basically copies the internet, then runs all kinds of text parsing queries on that, and then gives you some answers. But you're not looking at the internet itself. You're looking at the copy that's on Google server, and you're querying their data set, basically. But it's not, you're not asking the real internet. You're not going out to all these nodes and asking, I have this question, who can give me the answer? Now maybe that's an interesting idea. If you want to build a decentralized system, you're not thinking about centralized systems such as Google that just copy the complete internet and then run queries over them. You think about, okay, how can my question fan out to all the nodes in the network, and somebody who, the intelligent routing in the network says, well, here's some demand and here's some supply that fit together, more like a neural network, for instance, that these guys have done transactions before, there's a contract for this, they can come to a transaction and then work decentralized. That might be a way to construct such a system, and it's, yes.
I'm going to interrupt you, okay?
Oh, no, fine, please do so.
Kind of, what you're saying kind of overall is that centralization is bad, and decentralization is good. Now, I'd like to challenge that, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not in favor of centralization as such, but I think we need to understand why we've done this in history.
Yeah.
It's not about malicious plotting and conspiracies. It's about costs and economics, and you can't change that without addressing the question of economics. If you don't look at that, then you just try to go like blindly and remove all centralization. It does not work. That's like saying all government is bad, therefore we have anarchy. It does not work, right? It gives you Albania in 1985. It's not a good solution. Government has certain functions, and centralization has certain functions. And if you don't have it, then you simply can't operate. It's too expensive. And you take GitHub often. GitHub has solved a major problem in collaboration, and that's only possible thanks to centralization. If you didn't have centralization, you simply couldn't participate in open source as we do today. So that's a case where it's very, very profitable for everybody involved. And I don't think that having your repository on GitHub has any cost. Every time you do a Git pull, you're basically extracting your data and you get a full copy. In other cases, of course, if it's Facebook, whatever, then centralization is very, very expensive in terms of ownership of your data. You cannot get it out. It's completely owned against. So I think when you talk about centralization and decentralization, you have to look at the cost of decentralizing and what it actually implies in terms of building a remote service. We spent in my company the last 20 years building communication stacks. And they are really expensive to build. And it used to be that you've made one, you've made this web server, oh my God, we have to use this, and this would be a business, right? You couldn't just have it happening everywhere. I mean, you couldn't have little services all over the place. Way too expensive. And this cost is absolutely essential. It's not just about the design or the philosophy of systems, it's about the cost of trying to have, this conference happening in 25 locations would not be possible. It's got to be centralized for it to work, right?
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, it's not, of course I'm stating it in black and white, because what I'm trying to do is to of course, trigger the discussion out there. Because centralization has its means. Of course, it has its use in the past, and if you look at from the industrial revolution until today, centralization of production, indeed, whatever form, has had its time and place, indeed. But now we're entering into an era where we can question the fact that is centralization in this situation, is it the only viable route that we can take. I'd like to argue that there are alternatives, and there's very attractive alternatives indeed. And it has some price, and sometimes the price is too high, whether security or profitability that comes into play. Economics is indeed a very important part of that. It might not even be viable to do so. Sometimes it might be. Sometimes, it's not an economic transaction, it's a different kind of transaction. Maybe then the economics is not at play and it becomes more viable. Indeed, but there are alternatives that are slowly coming into play into a vision that we might be able to go ahead with alternatives, and that I think would solve some of the really deep fundamental problems that we're running into right now, and it might be an option. But I'm not the only one that.
Henk, before you go.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for stealing the thunder. But I'm thinking, with the example of GitHub, I'm thinking that the big problem there is not the part where you do Git, because that's fairly decentralized. You can always pull and push to another provider of Git, and you're just as safe. I think the real problem is in the parts that are not standardized, like the reviews or discussions.
Code reviews, discussions. Yeah. And there's more and more coming along. That's not stuff you can just easily pull out and go.
But I think standardization would be a big step towards decentralization. Yeah. I think that would help a lot. The other thing is when you mentioned the data, it actually came across my mind. I've got a unsolved problem. I've got payslips from all the companies that I worked in my life, and actually I will need them because I worked in 3 different countries by now. At some stage I will need to get pension somehow. I'm actually thinking, how do I keep all these payslips?
You keep traveling around, I guess.
I'm actually, the best I could come up with is just storing it at Amazon, Google, and Dropbox, and whatever else comes to my mind. So basically I don't lose them when one of them goes bankrupt.
I've become Estonian, I don't know what's the matter. Have you been Estonian? Okay.
No, not yet.
Yeah, but it's a nice example indeed from maybe there is no alternative, but I guess for some parts of these problems there is an alternative that we could use maybe, but they're real life problems, and we're getting more and more of these problems. And the question is, for some cases there are no solutions and no alternatives that are decentralized. Sometimes there are options that are viable. But basically, I like the argument that what I like to see is everything in this. If you think about this new network that's decentralized, and of these servers that work together, everything should be treated as a transaction. It's not obvious now, it's not really clear what the transaction is if you nowadays use the internet. If you're using Gmail, it's not obvious that you're paying with your eyeballs because you're watching some ads on the side as well. But you definitely are. That's the way that Google uses your data, and they analyze the data, you're paying with the views of these ads. It's not an obvious transaction, it's not a transparent transaction. And if you look at every system in an economic way, they see everything as a transaction in which value has to go back and forth, both ways, always. And you get that clear what its value is that goes back and forth. You get a different idea of a system, right? And that's a very natural idea. In my opinion, it's a very natural idea if you look at a system. And everything is a transaction in which value goes both ways. There's almost no system in which value always goes one way. It's very rare, I would say. Very hard to think about these things. So if you look at transactions, yeah, it's clear that if you look at it that way, you can start thinking about, okay, if value goes both ways, then what is it that goes both ways? What's going in the opposite direction? And maybe there are alternatives for the value that goes in the opposite direction right now. Maybe instead of me paying to Google with my data and my eyeballing, maybe I can just give them some money. So don't touch my data, here's your money, I'm just using Gmail, that's it. Maybe that would be much clearer, I would say. So there are alternatives to that.
I have one reaction here.
Yeah.
I actually pay Google a bit of money every month. I use Gmail or I don't know what it's called now. Like
Google Apps for Business?
Yeah. It's like, please don't look at my data. Okay, we promise.
Right.
But you still have to trust them. That's a pity. And email is actually something I was thinking about for a while now. Because I mean, everybody uses Gmail, right, or Hotmail, or Yahoo, and somebody here is shaking no vigorously, which is good. Who runs their own mail server? Oh, okay. Cool. And you guys? No, the right audience. So I was thinking about, so what's the cost of centralization and with email, with SMTP? I mean, it's decentralized per design, but we are using it in a centralized way, or more and more. And I wonder, or I think I know why people do it, because the Gmail web interface, for example, it just works really well, in my opinion. Again, somebody shaking no, so I add in my opinion. Yeah. No, but I wonder, what is the price that people are willing to pay, and when is it bad enough? You know, I don't see that changing. Or if you look at alternatives, so you have things like round cube and squirrel mail, and there's a bunch of those. There's some new ones like whiteout, but not a lot of people use them. Maybe not in this audience, okay, but not a lot of people use those, and I think it's because the quality is lower. So I think people are willing to pay the price for the added value, and that's, for example, in Gmail. So what's the cost? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, well, I think step one would be like, it should be obvious what the price is that you're paying. I mean, if it's obvious that you're paying with your private data and your eyeballing, etc., then people might get a different view of the service they use.
Because it is, of course, it's a matter of cost. People do not know what they pay for things. They think, oh, it's free, and it's easy. People use Windows XP still because it's easy, and they do not realize that it can be potentially very dangerous. So it is a matter of cost, but there is something, and centralization is of course not in itself bad, and decentralization is not in itself good. But if you design a system, you need to know what does it cost to make this centralized, what does it cost to decentralize it a bit. You do not need to decentralize it totally, but you need to know what do things cost? And that is for people who use mail is very hard, because they have no idea what they are doing, and they just send some mail and they get it back, and use social media to look at pictures and movies of cats. That's people do not ask these kind of things, but it is potentially dangerous that everybody knows everything of them, but they just simply don't know. But as soon as they become aware, people are looking for alternatives. And we are now, I think, at a moment in time in which there are alternatives. For some time ago, there was simply no alternative for a central bank and some central party issuing money. But now there is, and there are more ways in which we now have alternatives, which of course cost something, because Bitcoin is an extremely expensive system, of course, if you see how much electricity it costs. But so what we want to do, we do not want to simply decentralize everything because it's good, but we want to examine where are the big problems of centralization, because of course there are big problems in centralization, and what are alternatives, and certainly what are possible alternatives, because not everything is already usable, but it's very hard for people to see that some things can even be decentralized. If you are talking about decentralization, there are always people who ask, yes, but how are you going to do this? And how are you going to do that? And of course, it is very hard. But the nice thing is, if you type that exact question into Google, you always find a project which is trying to do exactly that: decentralized Google, decentralized mail, decentralized whatever. So at the moment, it's an interesting thing. And well, what we want to do, we want to be part of it. We want to be able to decide this is a good candidate for decentralization. This should not be decentralized. Maybe this should even more be centralized, if that's good. But we want to know what are the alternatives and what can we do to improve on those alternatives.
Henk, we have a response here in the front of the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm audible. Yes. To come back to both what you're saying and what you're saying about mail, mail was originally a decentralized service, of course. Everybody used to have their own mail service. And the main reason we don't have that anymore was spam. If everybody can have their own mail service, then spammers can have thousands of mail servers. And they did. And what happened is people can still have their own mail servers, but if you start a mail server now, you have to jump to all sorts of credential loops and trust loops and make sure that the big mail providers of this world know who you are and know that you never send spam. And in fact, when it was 2005 or so, I could install Postfix on my laptop and send mail and it would work. And somewhere around 2007, that stopped working because of spam. And that's actually a very general problem with decentralization, because if you do a decentralized search engine, what's to stop anybody from spamming that?
Well, I think that the problem is it's too cheap to send an email. It seems free.
You can't raise the cost of sending an email. People try that. The thing about spam
why can't you do that? Because what you can do is you can if you make sure that every transaction in a network involves exchanging value in some way, otherwise it won't work, then you make it impossible to send a lot of spam for free, for instance. Why can't you do that? Why can't you do that? Why is it impossible?
There's a pretty good alternative to email, which is called BitMessage. And it prevents spam by providing, you have to provide a proof of work, so you have to make a certain amount of calculations in order to send an email. Well, for one email it's not very hard, but as soon as you are going to send millions of emails, you will need a lot of resources to do this.
I want to point out that people have tried to reinvent email since email was started. Okay, people have always said we can do better, we can do better. You can't. SMTP is a de facto contract which is not going to go away. So the only really sane question is how can you, and this was the question that Google answered with Gmail, how can you stop spam on the current network? That's the only question that was worth answering. And it turns out, and this is, thank you for raising that because it's really, really important, is that the only way to, and frankly, spam is dead on Gmail. It's dead. I get 1 or 2 spams a day, and I used to get hundreds. All my addresses are public. I've been for a long, long time. The only way to stop spam is to use all the information together and to crowdsource that knowledge. When someone says this is spam, they get sent out to everybody else. And Google does that very cheaply, and that's what Gmail's killer thing was. That and plus infinite storage. All my emails before Gmail are dead. All my hosted servers have crashed. All the backup disks are the wrong size. They have the wrong... I don't have it anymore. My history starts with Gmail, my first message. So infinite space and no spam is worth an incredible amount of money to me. I can go and search emails back. And to be honest, I don't care if the NSA sees those emails. Right? I don't care. That trade-off is completely acceptable. I don't even have to trust Google. I know that they get letters from the NSA saying we want this stuff. FBI comes and gives them letters. I know that. There's no trust involved. But the trade-off is easily worth it. Because the fragile, spammy stuff I had before simply wasn't tenable. Right? And so that's why, that's one of the examples where attacking Gmail is really attacking the wrong target. That works. What you can do is you can create new models for stuff that you do not want the NSA to see, for stuff that you don't care about keeping for 20 years. Right? You can create new channels where the cost of that creation, and you can use BitMessage for that for sure.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we mean. Of course.
Hey, we have a response here.
Yeah, sorry, this is unrelated to email, but how, like, is your data really your data, like your property? Because it isn't stored in somewhere you own, and it is your opinion or something you create, but you could easily copy something else. So is it something really you own?
Property is what a judge says is property. Yeah. That's all it is. It's what a court defines. I mean, that's all it is. If somewhere a judge says that is your property, that's it, until someone else says it's not. I mean, it's, you know, there's no other definition for property than the legal opinion of judges and courts and parliaments.
Yeah, but legally is like digital data your property? Because I don't know actually.
Well, it might or it might not. But the question is, and now you for sure, if you post something somewhere, as I explained on Facebook, something, and you'll lose it like in the past, you'll lose it for sure. I mean, Facebook will shut down in 20 years, and my guess is where is your data, right? And you don't have any. There's no options for you now to say, well, this is my data, I just want to control it. You want to make sure that within 20 years it's still mine. Like Peter can still access his Gmail from 20 years back. The question is what happens with Facebook. There's no option right now, and that's the fundamental discussion is you have no choice at the moment. And it's not really obvious why you don't have a choice. It's technical reasons why you have no choice, because they centralize their stuff, and their business model is not very clear, because they earn their system complete. All Facebook, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg earns 30 billion because they're scanning your thoughts and your ideas and your posts, basically, and sharing it. That's why it's 30 billion.
Can I answer the specific question? So technically, what you write, your emails, your posts are your property. Yeah. They're protected by copyright law, they're an expression, and they cannot be even saved to hard disk without your permission. So every single web service since the very first has had the terms of use where as you sign up, you license all of your content. And they can do what they like. So it is your property, but you cannot enforce any kind of restriction on that because you've given it away. You've given a license which cannot be taken away. Yep. So it's property without any barriers.
You can't access it.
Oh, okay.
Right? And if you read the terms of service, some of them are very good, some of them are very weak. Some will offer it to third parties, and you've signed for that, too bad. And others don't.
Yeah. On this topic, I find it interesting that digitally, typically we confuse ownership with the actual thing. For example, I have my emails and they are my emails and I own them because they are on my server. And when I give them to Gmail, then sure, they are my emails, but they are really owned by them. Whereas if I have a car, the car exists in the world, and the laws of physics will take care that my car keeps existing. And then I have the key to the car, which allows me to use it. And if I sell my car, I just give you my key. But the ownership of the car does not depend on the car itself. So when we were talking about, yeah, SMTP is decentralized by nature and I can just have my own server, yeah, but I don't think that that's really decentralizing emails. You're just centralizing your emails in one server, but that's not. So if you lose ownership of the server, you lose the actual emails. For example, in Bitcoin, if you lose your address, your key, then you cannot find your transactions back. But your transactions exist in the blockchain independently of the ownership of this. So yeah, this goes a bit on the direction that you were mentioning, I think.
That's interesting. With ownership of stuff, whereas, I mean, the fundamental thing that I have is, I mean, you're still not, I mean, it's your data. If you can't access your data, I mean, you can own it, but if you're not able to access it, or somebody is doing something that's not very clear to you what they're doing with it, I think it's a good point of discussion. And why is that the case? And what are they doing with it? And what's the transaction that you give not clear?
It's also important to the terms we use, like ownership, like who owns the air in this room. I mean, it's a meaningless concept, and when it comes to data, often it's a meaningless concept to think about owning it. You use it, it goes, it comes, and it may be a collective good, as in the Gmails, the emails that Google stores are collectively useful because they filter out spam and they allow Google to do things which may be useful to us or not. But ownership has to be in the context of use and profit of use and some kind of rent on things. It can't just be, you know, that was my air, sorry, I breathed it. You know, those are my molecules, stop using them.
That's right. I mean, as Herman in his talk said, that data is only, you need context for the data to, at least when the data itself, you need context in it. But for me, if I create a blog post basically and it's getting lost because the service is shutting down, I still want that, because that's my thoughts that are being laid down in a digital world. They're still my thoughts, it's still my writings, they're still my product of my thoughts. So I want to stay owner of that. I want to have it accessible.
Yes, but what you want often doesn't really matter in a collective sense, right? What we want individually is pretty irrelevant and shouldn't be taken into such, you know, dramatic account. Individual desires and needs are not that important and don't have that much weight in society. What society needs is much more important. And it turns out that being able to access anyone's work and modify it and mix it is much more valuable than giving people that exclusive ownership.
Yeah, in some cases it might be the case, in other cases it might not be the case. Sometimes there might be more people that prefer to have control of their own data, of their own outings. In some cases they don't care. If they're personal stuff, if there's personal communication between me and my wife, many people might agree with me if I say it's just my social media. They might agree and say, well, I don't care. If the collective says use them for scanning or data analysis, fine. Then we should be able to...
Privacy and ownership are different things, huh?
Yeah, but actually defending Berger a little bit, looking at the blog reports is actually lost to software development society.
Yes.
Because he's a smart guy, he actually provides interesting topics, so when the blog shuts down, the whole society.
That is, yeah. So it's a question. It's a question of context, and it decides whether that's an irrelevant discussion or not. But still, in some cases, it might be a relevant discussion. So that's why we're bringing it up here. Is this relevant or not? I think in every situation, every discussion that we come up to is centralization. Is that a viable option? And what do you bring to the table? Is it viable when you look at the society as a whole? Then what is society? Or is it only individually interesting? Or maybe you should look at it like a well.
Yeah. I think it's maybe, sorry to be such an asshole.
No, continue. No. That's what these panel discussions are for. So
I think the privacy is a much more interesting and important aspect than ownership. I think the notion of being able to control the privacy of your discussions, not that they are by definition private, because that's meaningless. Like you walk around in public, you talk in public, things are not private by default, but if you need privacy, you can have it.
Exactly.
If you talk to your wife about your plans for a new baby, that should be private. Otherwise, the neighbors are like, "Whoa, new baby!" There are certain things that are off the record.
Yeah.
They have to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's like number one of the big dangers of centralization, that we've lost that ability to choose.
Yeah.
That number one thing is that privacy, we cannot choose anymore. When you make a phone call to somebody, that phone call is recorded, it's tracked, they know who you called, they know when you called, they know where you were, they know where the other person was, they know how long you spoke, they've taken your speech, they've digitized it, they've recorded it, they've indexed the whole damn thing.
Yeah.
Now that is without choice. Yeah. Furthermore, we pay way too much for that. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
That's really offensive. The mobile phone bill's the end of the month.
Yeah, another topic. But it's the question of choice. What do you have in some situations you want to have the choice.
But then maybe it's not because it's good that it's checked and everybody knows that it's known who you're talking to. Because it's very dangerous if people are talking to other people without the society as a whole knowing it. That's also something you can say, because maybe you want to have it private, but that's not interesting, because society as a whole needs this to be able to prevent disaster. That's the reasoning.
Privacy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Privacy is bad because people will immediately misuse it, and society as a whole.
Is this your theory, or is this what you're quoting?
This is what people are saying.
Politicians, of course, say this. They hate encryption because, well, they don't trust.
And of course, there is some point in that.
Yeah, for decades, the regimes have been built upon a notion. Okay, we know for you what's better for you because we represent the society. Well, there's a different agenda, and the thing is that this top guys coming back and forth in the history of humans. Again and again. And even in politics nowadays, you see this discussion coming back. Well, should we have like the NSA? What should be? Actually, as we speak, they're debating this topic. What should be? Is it better to prevent terrorism by scanning everybody, the phone calls and emails, or should we just respect the privacy and just take for granted that there will be a terrorist attack once in a while? It's very. And the price you're paying is your privacy. So it becomes. It's a very relevant discussion where the borders are. Sometimes, what is the topic that you're talking about? What the context is that you're
I don't think there's any
about?
real debate happening. There's debate outside, but if you look at the actual corridors of power where this debate is happening, there's no real debate. Like this notion that somehow the NSA will voluntarily, or that it's the leadership of whoever's in charge will voluntarily step back from mass recording is very naive.
Yeah.
It's not just that they can do it, it's that it becomes every year easier and easier to do it, and there's really no downside. Except now and then people leak about it, and you put them in prison. That's it. Leakers get...
That is a consequence of decentralization, because that makes it extremely cheap to spy on it, and it makes it extremely expensive to defend yourself against that.
Yes.
So,
the interesting thing is that last year with Holger Krekel here, and I've been, he's a very smart guy, he's from Germany, and he had a very, of course, in Germany, you see that the Chaos Computer Club, and that whole scene, they're very much debating this kind of, how do you keep things private, right? Because they, I mean, Germany has, of course, a large history of everything being spied on.
For sure.
I mean, in the worst way you can imagine. So they understand the dangers of things. If you centralize stuff, indeed, if this information being centralized, it'll be misused by whatever regime there is in place. So in Germany, it's a really an active scene, like, okay, what are the alternatives? And actually, a lot of technologies being developed are actually from Germany, because these people living over there, from the first-hand experience, know what it is, what the danger of a centralized system can be. And it has happened in the past, and they don't want that to really happen again. So it's a very valid discussion. That's why we're having it here as well as a panel discussion, because now things are getting worse and worse and worse, and the internet is changing. It's permeating into your physical surrounding as well. Then, in my opinion, the discussion gets more weight. I mean, I'm not trying to be negative here, but I think there's ways out of this situation as well. Then we should discuss, okay, what are these options that we have? What should we care about? Privacy? Should we care about ownership? Should we care about efficiency? Or should we just care about the cool stuff that we want to do? At least it should be a debate that we're talking about, because the consequences will become bigger and bigger and bigger. Yes.
I would also like to point out that new possibilities are arising. For instance, people have smart meters in their households, and normally the situation was that the energy corporation knows what your consumption of energy was. With these smart meters, new business models arise where consumers can sell their energy consumption statistical information on the market. So what I'd like to point out is that we can still stay in the corner with our privacy and say, okay, they shouldn't look at my data, but you can also look at ways to commercialize it, for example. Yeah. There are some interesting models now where energy consumption is not only available to the energy corporation where you have your account, but also towards other companies that might be interested to knowing what kind of energy consumption you have, and they can balance out the network, which can save them millions. That kind of business models are possible with big data kind of approaches.
Yes, I mean, indeed. I mean, and again, the question that becomes, the nice thing about these smart metering is that you are in control of your data about your behavior, right? You're the one that says, this has been my behavior, I'm willing to sell it for. I mean, Peter is willing to sell his scanning of his past data of emails just for the goodness of the flexible. I mean, the tool of Gmail which he likes to use. If you're using a smart meter in your house, you would say, well, I don't care if my behavior is being analyzed by an anonymous service. I'm willing to use that to pay for my part of my energy meter for my energy bill. That's fine, but at least you are in control. You're the one that says, okay, this is the way I pay. This is the value, this is the transaction we're talking about, this is the transaction that I put back. They give me something, I pay back with my...
It's a change of mindset where you can do this new kind of smart meters that are really new, but still these business models are possible with using these kind of techniques.
Yes.
Perhaps we can also start up our own mail service and say, okay, I would like to get paid for you reading my emails, for example. Now, the value you get in return for hosting your emails there is that you get free service, for example. That's the trade-off.
Yes, exactly. It's indeed a new business model, and that's the interesting discussion. If you decentralize it, because there's now the energy supply and consumption is being redistributed, and extra things that come with that, for instance, your behavior and data about your behavior, it's obvious that you're in control. You decide what you want to do with it, when you want to sell it, whether you want to make it part of the transaction or not. It's not like in the past. It would be in centralized system. It would be like your behavior would be centrally known, and the central party could do whatever they wanted with the data, and just you would not know about that, right? Basically.
Nobody's forcing you to use Facebook. Nobody's forcing you to use Gmail.
That's not entirely accurate. I mean, if you don't use, it's a natural monopoly. If you don't use the service, you can't contact people who are on the service. And I mean, it's come down to, like, Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook. And all the women I know are on Facebook, all the men follow me on Twitter, and Gmail is general, the network. And that's it. The 3 services connect everybody I know.
Yeah.
And there's not really a matter of saying, well, let's go and make something else. I will, Google Plus. No, forget it. I mean, it's monopolies.
I agree on that.
Sometimes exist, and they sometimes exist for good reasons. A natural monopoly can be a very efficient way of connecting many pieces.
Of course, nobody forces you to use those and but it's good to understand that there are alternatives as well. I mean, I use decentralized servers as well. I mean, and I know, but it's good to know. It should be obvious what the price is that I'm paying for using these services. It's a non-transparent transaction that we're talking about, and that's the key point. If you make distributed systems, I think Google extracts more information about you than you now realize they know about you, and that's the price that you're paying. But not many people know that that's the price they're paying. And I'm saying that our alternatives, and I'm not saying that we can use them at the moment, but we should have the discussion. At least we should become aware that there are alternatives, and we should become aware what the transaction is that we're involved in all the time. Yes, indeed, if we use Facebook, we know somehow somebody's using probably my pictures to analyze something, I don't know, I don't care, it's non-obvious to nobody. Indeed. There are alternatives that you can use, and we should be able to understand what this transaction is and what the alternatives are. And we're just saying, okay, we have been diving into this stuff for a long time, and yes, alternatives are available. Sometimes they're not non-viable, sometimes they're viable, sometimes they're not secure, sometimes they're actually better than what's existing. It should be an eye-opener. It should be a discussion. We should start the discussion, okay, what are these things then maybe? Can we build alternative systems that don't have these specific pitfalls from the past? They might have new ones, but that's up to us to discover. Yes.
I think there's a need of
battery in your mic. Yeah, I think there's a need of a battery in your mic.
Yeah.
Something about decentralization.
Maybe there's more of a need of a decentralized marketing system or something like that. You need decentralized economics before you can provide something like a new interface to email or whatever. I mean, as long as I know, there were postcards and stuff like that, and we sent that, and your message was on the back, and the address was on the back, and the mailman looked at the message and the stamp and everything, and he delivered the physical device. And it's like, okay, practical, but he can also read the message, so you stick an envelope on it. And basically, I think that if I use Google or Facebook or whatever, and I want my privacy and I want my data to be mine, I just envelope it with something like pretty good privacy or whatever. And in only those moments that I really want my privacy, I'll keep it private, and otherwise it's just there. There's no way, no other way that I can be in contact with so many people, like that man just said perfectly. There's no way to get into a network of people that is private enough. And unless there is a market that will be able to say, hey, you got something and you can do this, and someone else can do the same thing, the exact same thing that you do, and you can both get profit from it, you can both get your earnings from it, doing exactly the same thing without competition, but being in full competition at the same time. I mean, basically that's what Google did. They were the best. That's what Apple does. Some people think they are the best. How can you be the best in a concurrent environment where everybody is offering the same service and still be interconnected? If we don't have anything to monetize this, I don't think there will be any solution to decentralizing the internet.
So it's funny, the internet actually is by definition decentralized. I mean, the protocols...
I disagree.
The protocols, the internet, you remember the first virus on the internet, the first worm, right? And every single machine on the internet was a server. And the internet is basically about peer-to-peer connections. And this concept of the web is particularly bizarre because it creates this very asymmetric model of power where you have servers and clients, and fat servers and thin clients, and the fatter the servers, the thinner the clients, the more things were scalable. And so the thing is, you could make the internet in the old days out of server to server to server connections, and Usenet and UCCP and SMTP and so on work, but it wasn't scalable. And there's reasons for that. I'm sorry to come back to technical things, because if you don't solve those problems of scalability and the cost of making a service, you simply can't do it. I mean, there's all the will in the world, but building a web server, we used to do this. It's an amazing amount of work, and running a web server is an amazing amount of work. And if it's popular, suddenly you have 10,000 people on your website and the thing crashes, and that's an amazing amount of work. And this asymmetry, it's very cheap to start a web browser, it's very expensive to start a company that offers web services. And asymmetry has forced the internet into this web model of centralization. So that's like something to destroy, that cost. But privacy was something, and the cost of building server stacks is still very, very, very high, and scalable server stacks.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, long ago, an uncle of mine said, well, this client-server discussion is like the tides, right? It's going up and down. Then you have fat clients, thin clients, fat clients, thin clients. It goes up and down and down. It goes up and down, but depending on the technology that's being developed at the very moment in time. So it's not obvious that there will be some kind of asymmetry, but it shifts all the time, indeed. And it might stabilize, because basically, if you're really honest, I mean, the fact that there's a really client-server ID is basically a little strange. Now again, you get like the single-page applications, they're all written in Java. So now everything happens in the browser again, and then stuff less happens on the server again. So, and that's a thing that has been going back and forth since the 60s, actually. I mean, actually since the 40s. And it goes back and forth. So there is no stable, the stable ID is actually like in nature, a lot of things just transact, and there's no client-server ID, they just exchange value. And there's no idea of something, they always exchange something in both directions. And maybe what we can see over decades and decades is that this, going back between client and servers, everything becomes just as powerful and just offer the service that they have, that they are stabilized into some kind of equilibrium. And then you're done. Maybe that happens, I don't know. And then again, not everything is like massive and big scale, and not everything has an economic aspect to it. It can be transactions. Not everything has to be monetized to be viable. I might be saying that the same thing about, there are actually a good example of fully decentralized systems that work perfectly fine, but maybe they're not commercial systems. It might be the case. So it's not a general, it's not, as I said, it's not Haarlemmer only, that should be the solution to all problems. But there will be something in there. Some situation that it might be viable and that might give an alternative. And it's an interesting discussion. But you were saying you disagreed, and I was wondering what you disagreed about. But
I don't think the internet is decentralized by definition, or at least not anymore.
The IP protocol, the internet as a standard rather than as a culture and economic system. Of course, it's not centralized. Of course, it's not decentralized today. Today, it's a bunch of large companies surrounded by little clouds of cheap, thin. I mean, it's disgusting. Even the mobile phone is a 4-core. This is a real computer, and it's a thin client. It's offensive. Yeah. That much capacity, doing nothing except, you know, HTTP client side. It's
25% of all data goes through Amazon servers. Yeah, well, how decentralized is that? But it's an interesting discussion. If you look at it from an economic perspective, like e-commerce, it's interesting. If you look at Asian countries where they don't trade like we in Western region do, they're very much decentralized in their economic transactions than we are. They say they're standing at the market and doing the transaction. They pay with their mobile phone, and the guy they're standing on the market, and the guy next to them has a bike, and he just sends around these the orders, etc. And it's a very more fine-grained, decentral way of doing e-commerce, basically. And it's a different way than we're doing it in the West. What we're very much used to, you order all your websites on Amazon, and all the traffic in e-commerce goes through Amazon as well. All your search queries go to Google. That's not how it works everywhere in the world. And there are alternatives that might, in an Asian culture, this decentralized way, and this collection of small services works a lot better than here in the West. We're not used to it.
Korea is Asian. South Korea has like 4 companies that run everything, and that's it. Yeah. And there is like no middle class. And I mean, it is very centralized. It's much more than here. Yes.
Yeah. But you look at the Indian and the Chinese e-commerce, for instance, that's completely the opposite.
Right. So generalizations are always bad.
Yeah, exactly. not talk about regions, but there are at least that. Oh, so.
Yeah, I was wondering, because you're speaking about companies and decentralization, and I'm getting the feel that you mean other companies giving different services and you can choose between services. But is it what you're saying is that if you want to have an email service, that it should be an independent, like the blockchain, an independent service that is not built by a certain company but exists on its own, if I say that correctly? Because you know what happens if you build a successful service, companies like Google, Facebook, you know what happened to WhatsApp, stuff like that. They just buy these companies from the market and they put them, you know, they own these companies. So how do you feel about that? How do you prevent these centralized organizations to buy companies that at least give some sort of decentralization? How do you feel about that?
I think by decentralization, because then what you should do is to decentralize the ownership in such a way that it's very hard to buy it all. And of course, you should open source your solutions in such a way that people cannot close, in such a way that it cannot be closed anymore.
Yeah.
The legal terms
Yeah.
says it's not property of the company that
No.
provides the service, it's your ownership, so you cannot do anything with it.
For instance, yeah, that's another thing how to get money, because that's also people think that it's only possible to make money in a centralized company. But of course, that's...
We've actually solved many of these problems in the real world. I mean, the funny thing about software is how we try to reinvent reality like we're, young gods. We live in cities which are essentially decentralized. Nobody can buy a city. It doesn't matter how big you are. You can't come in and say, I want to buy Amsterdam, It doesn't work like that, right? Why not? Why can anyone start a restaurant in Amsterdam and, make money? And why is there decentralization of the food supply in Amsterdam? No one owns it. People have tried since the city was founded to own the food supply. It doesn't work. So ask why that doesn't work, and ask why that resists centralization, and why it's essentially decentralized, and you have models which work in software. You don't have to reinvent these things. And Bitcoin is fun, it's great, it's math, it's cool, but it's really like some kind of magical potion that we can somehow forget it. Look at reality, look at how real systems work, the ones that we depend on every day. Look how they survive constant hostile takeover by big, powerful companies who want to make money by taxing everybody all the time. It's been like this since the very beginning. And how they survive it. Doesn't require crypto magic. I'm sorry. I think that's just running away from things. What it requires, how cities survive is they have sufficient power in the middle class. They have contracts, they have regulation, they have free competition, you have choice of suppliers, you have freedom to leave. These are basic things. And it works in software the same way. Sorry to be lecturing, but I don't like hearing this kind of like, let's do everything on, BitMessage or something. It's just like, no, forget it. Forget it. The answers aren't in magic. The answers are in just hard work of building up power which can stop bandits coming in and stealing.
Peter. Thank you for putting our feedback on the ground.
Sorry.
we're already 5 minutes late, okay. so I'm looking at Berko to do the final thought.
Yes, thanks. Key, of course, this panel discussion, at least think about these things in it. And for some things there are alternatives, sometimes there aren't, and you have to be realistic what is viable, what is not viable. That's the whole point of this panel discussion. We're going to continue this discussion because there are very interesting technology developments as well going on here, and there's some, and it can have quite big consequences. Sometimes it doesn't. The thing is, at least, it's a very interesting topic to think about, and you leave it say, well, it will work as it has worked over the past decades, and you see what happens. I think that's not, as far as I'm concerned, that's not a wise choice. I mean, that's like running into the future backwards, and I don't think that's very smart. So what we're doing is like organizing a conference on the 11th of September, actually here in Groningen somewhere. You can find that on web11.org. The 11 is for, this one goes to 11, basically. It's fun. But at least put it in the agenda. If you think this is an interesting topic to think about, to talk about, and especially from a technology perspective, then please clear agendas and keep an eye on it. I'd like to thank the panel. I mean, I hope you enjoyed it at least, and keep in contact and keep discussing. Yeah.